In this exercise, we're going to be discussing dimensional constraints. We're going to be using the drawing 0305, creating dimensional constraints, give you some visual examples, and let's get started. Let's talk a little bit about what dimensional constraints are. We call them constraints because just like the geometric constraints, we're controlling the size of the geometry. It's one of the things that really makes Inventor a parametric modeler. Parametric dimensions drive the shape and size of a part, whereas associative dimensions will change based on the size of the part. So depending on if it's driving a dimension or it's reporting a dimension. AutoCAD and older 2D modelers actually will report or tell you how big an object is, whereas in Inventor, we can actually control the size using these geometric dimensions. It's very important to understand the difference. One of the big things about Inventor is getting used to the fact that you roughly draw something out and then go back and add dimensions after the fact. This is kind of counterintuitive to those who are used to using the older 2D modelers such as AutoCAD, whereas you drew something exactly to size and then you put the dimensions on there just to show how big it was. This is a real paradigm shift for most people getting used to changing from one to the other. One of my favorite parts about Inventor is the fact that we can use one dimension tool to create all of our dimensions. You'll notice up here at the top, the dimensional constraints are actually contained inside of the same ribbon panel as the geometric constraints. But you know that you have multiple geometric constraints here, but you only have one dimensional constraint. The reason is because Inventor is smart enough to understand what kind of dimension you're trying to create. It has artificial intelligence built in that'll choose whether you're going to do horizontal, vertical, aligned, angular, radial, and it automatically uses the correct dimension on the object that you're selecting. This is a wonderful tool inside of Inventor that you can go in and not have to think about what dimension you're creating. Use the one tool, and Inventor does it for you. If we take a look at this example, we have several different dimensions displayed. We have a horizontal and vertical dimension. You can see we have multiples here. We have dimensions that actually have formulas inside of them. We know this because we see this little fx here. We have an aligned dimension, shows how long something is at an angle. We have the diameter dimension here. We have the angle of this triangle here. We could come up and put a dimension on this and have a radial dimension. And we can also see that because this is a formula inside of here, if I change this from 22 to 25, you can see that both dimensions are changed. The reason is because this dimension is referencing D5, which is this top dimension. So you can see these dimensions are very intelligent and have a lot of information built into them. Not all dimensions can be parametric dimensions every time because after so long, they start interfering with each other. So sometimes, such as this angular dimension here, we create what's called a driven dimension. You know this because it's inside of parentheses, and it's just there for reference. It says, hey, this angle from here to here, this line to this line, is 60 degrees. You can turn on driven dimensions by selecting the dimension you want to modify, and then hit the driven dimension command up here at the top. So now instead of driving the size of this triangle, it just references and makes it an associated dimension. Once again, to turn it off, select it, hit the driven button again. So now it's back to a parametric dimension. So let's take a more detailed look at creating some dimensions here. I'm going to pan over here and zoom in on our little odd shape here, and I can start adding dimensions to it. To do this, I go up, I select our single dimension command at the top. I come down, and I can start giving this dimensions. You can see here that as I do this, my object starts to grow and shrink. If I hit F8, I see that there are several geometric constraints on here. And so as I add these dimensions, Inventor's smart enough to obey those geometric constraints. Gives us the ability to come in here and give it angular dimensions just by selecting on two non-parallel lines. Now have an angular dimension. I can dimension out to a point here, to either a line or another point. and it will drive that dimension. I can select a line and pull it up. I can select 2 lines, drag down, and you can see that it's very easy to create these dimensions. I can also start adding relationships. I do this by coming in here and I place a dimension and I say, I want that to equal this other dimension just by selecting the dimension I want it to equal. So now that's the exact same dimension. Do the same here. So I want this dimension to equal this dimension. Now I don't have to remember what that is. Inventor automatically adds in that relationship. You can see here, by adding this dimension up here at the top on this line here, it already has an equal constraint to it. So it's saying, hey, this will over-constrain it. Choose accept to create a driven dimension. So this is going to create an associated dimension. So if this changes, it's going to show us what this is, but it won't allow us to add that input. And the reason is because this would interfere, if I hit F8 here, with this equal dimension where it's equal to this, that is actually equal to this. So I've used a geometric constraint to add in this information to save me from having to create a dimensional constraint. It's better to create a geometric constraint inside of Inventor than it is to create a dimensional constraint, because you want to help control the shape of an object before you worry about the size. So our geometric constraints are about the shape, whereas the dimensional constraints are more about the size. If you're creating different types of dimensions, Inventor sometimes will automatically add them for you. So if I want to do an angular dimension and I select on 2 lines that are not parallel, it'll automatically give me an angular. This one's driven, of course. If I need to create, say, an aligned dimension, you can see here it's trying to create either horizontal or vertical. It's not wanting to create the line for me. So I can right click, come down here and select the align command. Now, this allows me to create an aligned dimension on there. So if it's not giving me what I want, this is very true also with radial versus diameter, you can right click and choose what type of dimension you actually want it to be. As you're creating your dimensions, you'll notice that Inventor automatically comes up and asks us what size should it be. Once again, we can either reference another dimension or we can type something in. If we didn't want it to ask us this every single time, if we undo this dimension we just created, we select the dimension command again, and I pick my line, and I drag it down, and before I actually drop my dimension, if I right click, you'll notice there's an option up here that says Edit Dimension. If I uncheck this, whatever dimension it is, whenever I drop that dimension, is what it'll stay. Now I can go back and change it after the fact. So if you just want to real quickly drop a bunch of dimensions in here and then go back and change them, come back in here and say, okay, this one needs to equal this one after the fact. It'll allow us to do that. However, most of the time whenever I create a dimension, I actually want to put in what it needs to be. So I right click and I'll turn that back on so that as soon as I drop it in there, it comes up and asks me what that dimension needs to be. Hit OK, and now I have that dimension. If we pan over here a little bit, we can take a look at our object here. And you can see I select on this arc, I can right click, and now I have the option between radius dimension, diameter dimension, and arc length dimension. Choose arc length. I can actually determine what it is. So by right clicking, I get that option to tell Inventor what kind of dimension I want to use if it doesn't automatically select it. Even though you may have all the dimensions on an object you may want, dimension is also a good cheat to be able to come in and verify that you have your constraints on there the way you want them. Basically, you come in here, you select the 2 lines, and we can look and see, yes, this is 90 degrees. This is a quick cheat way, instead of looking at your geometric constraints. If I pan back over to my odd shape here, and there's a lot of constraints on there and trying to track it down and making sure that, this is really parallel to this. Somewhere in there we got perpendicular. Trying to figure out what that is can get confusing. So sometimes I will use a dimensional constraint and come in and just verify what that needs to be. It may tell me it's driven, but that's what driven dimensions are for, is to give you information. So now that's an informational dimension that tells me, hey, this is that angle. Last thing we'll talk about real quick here is the options you have as you're creating and editing these dimensions. If I come in here and select this dimension, I have several options inside of here by selecting this little arrow. I can come in and I can actually measure an object. If I didn't have this dimension on here, I can say measure again here. Measure this. Take that out of there. I could change this into a formula. So I could say whatever that was minus 0.025. You can see there, it changes that to 0.6. The other options I have inside of here is I can adjust the tolerance, show what the precision needs to be. So now it will show 4 decimal points instead of 3. I also have a recent history. So it shows me what I've done recently inside of this drawing. And it's very nice. That way, if you don't have to remember how to type something out, or so if it's pretty long, you can just come in here and select it and it'll automatically do it. You can also say show dimensions. So if you have another consumed sketch in the background, you could actually say show the dimensions on that sketch and select a dimension that's in another sketch. So you can reference in that sketch dimension, and now that information's in there. So those are just some of the options that you have inside of the dimensional constraint command. Play with this, see what you can do with it, and have some fun with it.